Chef Daniel Voss prided himself on perfection. His culinary creations were known across the country, each dish a masterpiece. But nothing in his years of experience had prepared him for the invitation that arrived one autumn afternoon. An elegant black envelope, sealed with crimson wax, requested his presence at a secluded estate to prepare an exclusive meal for a select group of distinguished guests. The fee promised was generous beyond belief, too generous to refuse, and Daniel accepted, unaware that this meal would be unlike any he had ever prepared. The hollow estate sat deep within a fog-shrouded forest, its towering silhouette a relic of another time. Daniel's car crunched along the gravel driveway as the looming mansion came into view. Inside, the grand dining hall was prepared for an opulent feast, with flickering candelabras casting long shadows over the gleaming tableware. Daniel set to work in the cavernous kitchen, its ancient stone walls echoing every chop and simmer. The ingredients provided were exquisite, but strange. Rare herbs he'd never seen, meats with an unplaceable origin, and wines that shimmered unnaturally in the dim light. He pushed down the unease gnawing at him, convincing himself that eccentric clients were nothing new. Yet a single thought kept creeping into his mind. Who exactly am I cooking for? Daniel was no detective, but his meticulous nature made him keenly aware of every detail. As he prepared each course, he noticed oddities. The serving staff, silent and expressionless, never made eye contact. The dining room, set for a dozen guests, was eerily quiet, despite the flicker of movement behind the frosted glass doors. As the evening began, Daniel plated the first course and rang the service bell, but instead of waitstaff, the doors opened on their own. Invisible hands carried the plates to the table. Daniel's heart pounded. This isn't normal. Curiosity and dread gnawed at him. Between courses, he peeked through the kitchen door, but the guests remained obscured in shadow, their silhouettes barely visible. The only sound was an unsettling hiss, like a soft inhale after each plate was served. Halfway through the meal, Daniel noticed something deeply disturbing. The dishes returned to the kitchen untouched, but they looked drained. The vibrant colors of his sauces had dulled, the aromas faded. It was as if the essence of the food had been sucked away. He touched a piece of meat with trembling fingers. Cold, dry, devoid of life. His chest tightened. They're not eating the food. Then a horrifying realization struck him. They're feeding on something else. A chill ran down his spine as he felt a sudden fatigue wash over him, as though something unseen was pulling at him, draining him. His reflection in the polished silverware looked pale, gaunt, and the guests, still hidden from sight, seemed to grow sharper, more present, with each course he served. What have I stepped into? Daniel thought, fear coiling tightly in his chest. He wasn't just cooking for them, he was becoming part of the meal. Daniel's mind raced as he continued preparing the next course. The realization that his guests were feeding on something unseen gnawed at him. Each moment in the kitchen felt heavier, as though unseen eyes were watching quietly. He began to explore the mansion between courses, searching for clues. In a dusty side room, he found an old portrait of previous chefs who had served at the Hollow estate, none of whom were ever heard from again. Their faces looked eerily similar to his, gaunt and hollow-eyed, as if their very souls had been drained. The guests remained obscured in shadow, but Daniel noticed unsettling details. The faint glow in their hollow eyes, the way their forms flickered like illusions, their elongated fingers tapping soundlessly on the table. The silent staff seemed almost puppet-like, their movements mechanical, their eyes blank. Were they victims too? Or worse, were they part of the sinister feast? Daniel recalled the subtle glances they exchanged whenever he entered the room, as if silently acknowledging his impending fate. As Daniel plated the main course, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over him. He felt an invisible force press against him, draining him further with each moment. The candlelight dimmed, and a voice, raspy and cold, whispered in his ear, "We are not yet satisfied." His hands shook violently, and he dropped a knife, its clang echoing through the silent hall. A shadowy figure appeared in the doorway, watching. Its eyes burned like embers, and a grotesque wide grin stretched across its face before vanishing. Daniel pieced together the horrifying truth. The guests weren't human anymore. They were entities bound to the mansion, feeding on life essence rather than food. The more he served, the weaker he became. His reflection in the kitchen's polished surfaces grew paler each time he looked. He realized he was being fattened like a lamb for slaughter. But questions haunted him. Why him? Was there a way out? He scoured every corner of the mansion, searching for answers. An old ledger revealed a chilling pattern. Each chef brought to the Hollow estate disappeared after serving the final course. In a hidden drawer within the library, Daniel found a worn journal from a previous chef. Its pages were filled with frantic scribbles detailing a ritual to break free, serve a final course made with a piece of his own essence to poison the guests. But it would come at a cost. His own soul might be trapped forever, bound to the mansion like those before him. The choice loomed large. Flee now while he still could, or risk everything to end the cycle of horror. The clock ticked ominously, and Daniel knew his time was running out. Daniel felt the weight of the journal's revelation settle heavily on his chest. He knew escape wouldn't be easy, but the idea of being consumed by unseen forces was worse. As he prepared the next course, his hands trembled, not from exhaustion, but from terror. Each shadow in the kitchen seemed to inch closer, every flickering candle a reminder that his time was running out. He had to make a choice soon, but the mansion seemed to know that too. Desperation drove Daniel to scour the mansion for more answers. He discovered hidden passages behind the walls, places where the servants, if they could be called that, moved soundlessly. He found fragments of letters from previous chefs, all echoing the same warning. The feast never ends. Daniel theorized that the mansion itself was alive, a hungry entity using the guests as vessels to feed. The final course was not food. It was the soul of the chef. Determined to break free, Daniel returned to the kitchen, heart pounding. As he worked on the dessert course, he noticed the servants watching him more closely, their mechanical movements slowing, as if waiting for him to make a mistake. The guests, still shrouded in shadow, sat eerily still. One figure, slightly more defined than the rest, locked eyes with him for a moment. Daniel's blood ran cold. That figure wasn't a guest. It was a reflection of him. He realized the mansion had already started the process of consuming him. The final course wasn't just his essence. It was his entire being. He had one chance left, and the time for hesitation had passed. Daniel's breathing grew shallow as he pieced everything together. The walls whispered to him now, indistinct murmurs that became clearer the more he listened. He could feel the mansion feeding on him, draining his will with every moment he stayed. In the dim corridor, he saw flashes of those who had come before him, their faces twisted in eternal agony, trapped in an endless cycle of servitude. As he worked on the final course, Daniel's mind raced. He recalled the journal's instructions for the ritual. Sacrifice a piece of himself into the dish, but what would that mean? His blood? His memories? His very soul? The mansion pulsed around him, eager for its final taste. He dug deeper into the journal and found a hidden note. They will tempt you. They will promise freedom. Do not trust them. Once you begin the ritual, you cannot stop. The shadows in the kitchen lengthened as Daniel realized the enormity of his task. He could feel the mansion's hunger pressing against him, urging him to give in, but he also felt a spark of defiance. If he could survive this night, perhaps he could break the cycle once and for all. The silence felt unnatural, stretched too thin, like a held breath. The chamber walls pulsed faintly, as though the Hollow King's presence still lingered beneath the surface. Amelia gripped Ethan's shoulders, shaking him lightly. "Ethan, wake up," she murmured, but he remained still. Lila stood, her back pressed against the cold stone, staring at the tunnel entrance. "It's not over," she whispered. "Something's still here." A deep tremor shook the chamber, just rained down. From the shadows beyond the altar, a figure began to form, a grotesque silhouette, shifting and writhing, as if it were made of the darkness itself. The Hollow King's voice slithered through the chamber. "You think you have won. I am eternal." Amelia staggered backward as the entity fully took shape. It no longer had a human form. It was an abyss given life, a swirling mass of shadows with piercing ember-like eyes. The air around it cracked and warped, an oppressive force pressing down on them. Lila grabbed Amelia's wrist. "The dagger!" She started, but the Hollow King raised a clawed hand, and Lila was thrown violently against the stone wall. Amelia stood her ground, gripping the dagger tightly. "You're bound to this place," she said, voice steadier than she felt. "We severed your hold on Ethan. You have nothing left. The Hollow King laughed, a grating, bone-deep sound. Foolish girl, I am not bound here. I am bound to you. A wave of realization crashed over Amelia, her visions, her connection to the Hollow King. They had never been accidental. He had marked her long before she ever set foot in Black Hollow. No, Amelia breathed. I reject you. With every ounce of strength, she drove the dagger into the chamber floor, where the Hollow King's form loomed. The stone cracked, releasing a blinding surge of light that swallowed the entity whole. The Hollow King shrieked, its form contorting, unraveling. Its essence was dragged downward into the abyss, its claws scraping against reality as it was sealed away. The crimson light faded, the oppressive weight lifted. The Hollow King was gone. Amelia collapsed, exhaustion hitting her like a crashing wave. Lila rushed to her side, helping her sit up. Ethan stirred, groaning, as he regained consciousness. "We're alive," Lila whispered, half in disbelief. The tunnels around them groaned, the ancient structure beginning to give way. "We need to leave," Amelia said, forcing herself to her feet. Together, they stumbled back through the tunnels, the remnants of the Hollow King's domain crumbling behind them. By the time they reached the surface, the first light of dawn was breaking over Black Hollow. As they stepped into the cool morning air, Amelia looked back one last time. The town was quiet again, but something about it felt different. The nightmare had ended, but the scars it left would linger. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past night settle on her shoulders. "It's over," she said. Lila and Ethan exchanged a glance. Exhaustion etched into their features. "For now," Ethan muttered. They turned toward the rising sun, leaving the horrors of the Hollow King behind. But deep in her bones, Amelia knew this was only the beginning.